Good morning, room 13 and room 7. All right, today we will read our 15th reading from Pippi Longstockings by Astrid Lindgren. And our 15th reading marks the beginning of chapter 10. Pippi acts as a lifesaver. And I am sitting out on my balcony. The birds are chirping. It's beautiful out. Look at these blue skies. So nice. Okay, let's get started. Chapter 10, Pippi acts as a lifesaver. On Sunday afternoon, Pippi sat wondering what to do. Tommy and Annika had gone to a tea party with their mother and father, and so she knew she couldn't expect a visit from them. The day had been filled with pleasant tasks. She'd gotten up early, served Mr. Nielsen fruit juice and buns in bed. He looked so cute sitting there in his light blue nightshirt, holding the glass in both hands. Then she had fed and groomed the horse and told him a long story of her adventures at sea. Next, she had gone into the parlor, painted a large picture on the wallpaper. Now, the picture represented a very large lady in a red dress and a black hat. In one hand, she held a yellow flower, and in the other, a dead rat. Pippi thought it was a very beautiful picture. It dressed up the whole room. Then she had sat down in front of her chest and looked at all her birds' eggs and shells, and thought about all the wonderful places where she and her father had collected them, and about all the pleasant little shops all over the world where they had bought the beautiful things that were now in her treasure chest. And then she had decided to try and teach Mr. Nielsen to dance the Scottish jig. Oh, but he didn't want to learn. For a while, she had thought of trying to teach the horse, but instead, she had crept down into the woodbox and pulled the cover down. She had pretended that she was a sardine in a sardine box. And oh, it was a shame Tommy and Annika weren't there, so they could have been sardines too. And now it began to grow dark. She pressed her little pug nose up against the window pane and looked outside at the autumn sun going down. She remembered that she hadn't been riding for a couple of days and decided she must go at once. Well, that would be a nice, pleasant way to end a Sunday evening. So, accordingly, she put on her big hat, fetched Mr. Nielsen from a corner where he sat playing marbles, saddled the horse, and lifted him down off the porch. And off they went, Mr. Nielsen on Pippi, and Pippi on the horse. It was quite cold, and the roads were frozen, so there was a good crunchy sound as they rode along. Mr. Nielsen sat on Pippi's shoulder and tried to catch hold of some of the branches of the trees as they went by. But Pippi rode fast, so fast that it was no use. Instead, the branches kept boxing him in the ears, and he had a hard time keeping his straw hat on. Pippi rode through the little town, and people pressed anxiously up against the walls when she came storming by. The town had a market square, of course, and out there were several charming old one-story buildings and a yellow-painted town hall, and there was also an ugly wretch of a building, newly built and 3 stories high. It was called the skyscraper because it was taller than any of the other houses in town. On a Sunday afternoon, the little town was always quiet and peaceful. But suddenly, the quiet was broken by loud cries. The skyscraper's burning! Fire! Fire! People came running from all directions. The fire engine came clanging down the street, and the little children who usually thought fire engines were such fun now were crying from fright because they were sure their own houses were going to catch fire too. The police had to hold back the crowds of people gathering in the square so that the fire engine could get through. The flames came leaping out of the windows of the skyscraper, and smokes and sparks enveloped the firemen who were courageously trying to put out the fire. Now the fire had started on the first floor, but was quickly spreading to the upper stories. Suddenly the crowd saw a sight that made them gasp with horror. At the top of the house was a gable, and in the gable window, which a little child's hand had just opened, stood two little boys calling for help. Remember the gables that Pippi described in the chapter where she's chasing the police all around, or the police are chasing her around her house, and she goes and she stands on top of the gables? Gables, I think, are an old-fashioned word for this part of this house design. Kind of like if you were going to stick a flag off the top of your house. Oh, I can't quite see a good picture. If there were gables on this house, they'd probably come up at the points. Yeah. So, I think that's what a gable is. Oh no, I've lost my spot. Oh, right. Suddenly the crowd saw a sight that made them gasp in horror. At the top of the house was a gable, and in the gable window, which a little child's hand had just opened, stood two little boys calling for help. "We can't get out because somebody has built a fire on the stairs," cried the older boy. He was 5, and his brother a year younger. Their mother had gone out on an errand, and there they stood all alone. Many of the people in the square began to cry, and the fire chief looked worried. There was, of course, a ladder on the fire truck, but it wouldn't reach anywhere near the little boys. To get into the house to save the children was looking impossible. A wave of despair swept over the crowd in the square when they realized there was no way to help the children. And the poor little things, they just stood up there and cried. It wouldn't be long now before the fire reached the attic. Now, in the midst of the crowd in the square sat Pippi on her horse. She looked with great interest at the fire engine and wondered if she should buy one like it. She liked it because it was red and because it made such a fearful noise as it went through the streets. Then she looked at the fire and she thought it was fun when a few sparks fell on her. Presently she noticed the little boys up in the attic, and to her astonishment they looked as if they weren't enjoying the fire at all. Oh, Pippi. That was more than she could understand, and at last she had to ask the crowd around her, "Why are the children crying?" First, she got only sobs in answer, but finally a stout gentleman said, "Well, what do you think? Don't you suppose you'd cry yourself if you were up there and couldn't get down?" "Oh, well, I never cry," said Pippi. "But if they want to get down, why doesn't somebody help them?" "Because it isn't possible, of course," said the stout gentleman. Pippi thought for a while. Then she asked, Can anybody bring me a long rope?" "What would you do with that?" asked the stout gentleman. "The children are too small to get down the rope, and for that matter, how would you ever get the rope up to them?" "Oh, well, I've been around a bit," said Pippi calmly. "I would like a rope." There was not a single person who thought it would do any good, but somehow or other, Pippi got her rope. Not far from the gable of the skyscraper grew a tall tree. The top of it was almost level with the attic window, but between the tree and the window was a distance of almost 3 yards. 3 yards. Well, think of a yard in a house. It's a pretty big distance. They also measure football fields in yards. I don't really know exactly how big a yard is, but I imagine it's quite a span. And the trunk of the tree was smooth and had no branches for climbing on it. Even Pippi wouldn't be able to climb it. The fire burned. The children in the window screamed. The people in the square cried. Pippi jumped off the horse and went up to the tree. Then she took the rope and tied it tightly to Mr. Nielsen's tail. Now "You be Pippi's good boy," she said. She put him on the tree trunk and gave him a little push, and he understood perfectly what he was supposed to do, and he climbed obediently up the tree trunk. Of course, it was no trouble at all for the little monkey to do that. Now the people in the square held their breath and watched Mr. Nielsen. Soon he had reached the top of the tree. There he sat on a branch and looked down at Pippi. She beckoned to him to come down again, and he did so at once, climbing down on the other side of the branch so that when he reached the ground, the rope was looped over the branch and hung down double with both ends on the ground. So now, if you can imagine the tree goes up like that, Mr. Nielsen has run the rope up one side and it's hanging down on the other. I wonder what's going to happen next. Well, room 7 and room 13, we're going to stop there for today. Today is Tuesday, so you have an activity connected to this reading. Go ahead and have a look at the activity, and you'll find out what you need to do. Have a great day.